For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Alexandria Egler. I work in the President's office, and I see my students, so you know I teach in the Religious Studies Department as well. So thank you all for coming to our annual Franciscan lecture. I've been given the privilege of introducing you to someone who has captured my heart, as I'm sure she will yours. Just a brief story. I first met Sister Kathleen a couple of years ago at a conference on the Franciscan moral vision. She was and she is part of a group who has worked with great commitment and vision to make sure that our Franciscan legacy and mission remains relevant and accessible for all of us. What unfolded during this particular conference was a deeper understanding that the lives and spirituality of St. Clare and St. Francis invite each of us, regardless of who we are or where we are in our life's pilgrimage, to extend our own lives in response to what we refer to as God's extravagant love, a love that extends to and embraces every individual and all of creation. So as I was sitting at this conference trying to absorb all of this and figure out what I was really doing at this meeting with this brain trust of Franciscanism, along comes Sister Kathleen, and as you will see in her very shy and reticent manner, sat down next to me. After very subtly interrogating me about my background, which in retrospect, had I lied and said I was a mathematician or an IT specialist, her next question would have been the same. She asked if I would write a synopsis of one of the scholarly articles from the vault of the Franciscan tradition for use in the classroom, one of which I think all of you got in your program. I made an excuse saying I wasn't sure I had the time, but more importantly, I did not think I was qualified. And she looked at me and she said, "You're here, aren't you?" She said, "You believe and embrace the Franciscan mission, don't you? You're qualified, you're going to do it. And besides that, I want one from every school in the AFCU, so it's settled. There's no deadline, but there are no excuses." So what I learned at that moment was not only do you not say no to Sister Kathleen, you can't say no to her, and after talking with her for about 3 minutes, you really have no desire to say no. Because of her vision and her commitment to the Franciscan charism, it's one that she enthusiastically believes is experienced and shared and cultivated by each one of us. As Franciscans and as a Franciscan institution, we are responsible for the legacy of this tradition and the many ways in which it is expressed. Now, as this is the Jubilee Year of Mercy, and one of the conditions of receiving a plenary indulgence is confession, I have to confess, I have yet to write that synopsis. She knows it. It's still on my kitchen table, but now I have a little more free time, so I promise it's going to get done. Sister Kathleen Moffatt is a Franciscan in every understanding of that definition. Her joy, enthusiasm, reverence for all of creation, her commitment to social justice, respect, and love for the human person are reflected in every word she utters and every action that she takes. Her passion for the charism and the tradition is engaging and infectious. Sister Kathleen's life is an inspiration and an embodiment for what it means to live the spirituality of Clare and Francis, a spirituality that responds to God's extravagant love. And I'm very happy that she's here with us today to speak with us about what she believes is already written in our hearts. Please welcome Sister Kathleen Moffatt.
Everybody should have an Alexandria introduce them. I know a whole community back home that wouldn't recognize the person she just introduced. Well, this has been a pleasure, and you can feel it. You can feel it in the building. Yesterday was my first time here. Is this loud enough? Yeah. Okay. It was my first time here, and you can just feel. And then I just this morning had a delightful exchange with your president. And where's Brother Bill? Bill's been my sidekick since I got here. Honestly, congratulations on what's in the woodwork and in your hearts. Really, it's a privilege to have come. What I'd like to do is, you brought in things with you, and I just want to refer to what's in your hand, because you'll take it out. Well, I won't be working from it, but this is a very important little piece. We call it the custodians of the tradition. You heard Alex confess that she hasn't done hers. I don't even remember what I gave her to do. But I'm at best, at my life, I was an 8th grade teacher. And when you teach young teenagers, you learn to use every possible piece of pedagogy that's possible. Now, of course, you have a whole lot more today than I even had to work with. One of them is to take the works that ordinarily we would shy from and ask people to do a synthesis of it. And that's what you're holding. And the one I chose, Brother Bill Short, that may be a name you'll get to hear as life goes on here, if you haven't already. Marvelous teacher, marvelous. He could teach you the phone book and you'd want to learn more. So that's what I chose for you to take home. The other part that you have is something that, if you fall asleep while we're doing PowerPoints, and if you wish this were Friday and not Thursday, maybe later on when you want to have a morning cup of coffee or whatever, this may capture a whole lot of what we're doing this morning. This is not on the PowerPoints. It will not be duplicated. It won't be repetitive. It's something that really catches you. It grips you. By the time you get to the end, I know I'm crazy with this, but it makes you say, this is what I want with all my heart. This is what I desire. This is what I want with all my heart. At least I think it does it. And I was thrilled to be able to use your art. I've been working with your art for at least since '07. Around the world, they have seen your art that hangs right as soon as you walk into the college, which was commissioned for here, for St. Francis. It's about time I brought it home. I try to give credit to St. Francis when I use it. So that's enough for now for the commercial. There is a wonderful book called Tattoos on the Heart. And I have to admit it was written by a Jesuit. There are times when I can be ecumenical. And the Jesuit's name was Gregory Boyle. And he founded the homeboys industry out in Los Angeles for gangs. One of his first assignments after he became a Jesuit. I would recommend that book in a heartbeat to every one of you. And now we can Google it and go to Amazon. It's not expensive. It's got to be the best book ever written that encapsulates what we believe is the meaning of the Christ. What we believe is the meaning of why Jesus came. One of the chapters, he speaks of a section of listening to some record they found that their mother had made. I'm just going to say the words and see what you think. And the soul felt its worth. And the soul felt its worth. Where's that from? It's Christmas. Which one? Pardon me?
Oh Holy Night.
Yep. It's Oh Holy Night. And if you want a fascinating read, Google the story behind the writing of Oh Holy Night. But think for a moment of that remarkable phrase, and the soul felt its worth. That is the reason. That is the reason why we're revitalizing and retrieving the Franciscan intellectual tradition. For the graduates that are here, for the students who are here, why is it, let's start with Tim Kaine, why is it that people like to brag that they were Jesuit educated? Why can't we brag that we're Franciscan educated? Yes. Because of the good that you do, because you have a caring heart, because on many, yes?
And you're on the path of brotherhood.
On the path of brotherhood. Because you recognize that you are brother and sister to everyone that you meet, regardless of cultural background, household, religion, whatever. Somehow or other, in your 4 years when you went through a Franciscan place of education, something happened that usually makes us real nice to be around. There's a humanity. I remember we had to do a program with the head honcho, big, important Jesuit from Guelph, Canada. It was on discernment. I was on our general council. And it was murder. He was teaching us discernment, okay? He wrote the book. And we cooperated every way we could to learn discernment. It was from Guelph. John English was his name. And it was the general council, so we couldn't get away with anything. At the end of the week that we were put through all these hoops, if today's Tuesday, the paper's green. If it's Thursday afternoon, the paper's yellow. Nothing, we were not allowed to change anything. But of course, we were moaning and groaning a lot because it was like a square peg in a round hole. It's still the gospel, but there's different flavors. He told us at the end of the week, we taught him humanity. He said, it has been a pleasure to be with you. I know that you struggled, and of course we learned a lot. We learned a whole lot. He was the guru of the whole thing. But he says, no, he says, I've learned humanity. I've learned that everybody is an individual, and we have to respect that. So, having said all that, I would like to introduce you to a major moment right now. It's only 15 years old, and that's the beauty of going around and me being crazily excited. I have a background, Franciscan studies, God help me. And I worked with the Franciscan Federation. I did programming, all kinds of things, all right? But this moment that we're in right now is catching fire. It doesn't have to, it already is. And it already is because you wouldn't be in that seat right now if it wasn't already in your heart. If you find yourself nodding, like we often do, agreeing, it's already there. Somebody's just putting a whole lot of words around it. God help us. People like to say, and very wrongly so, that, what am I doing here? That Francis was against learning. Francis was against arrogance that goes with learning. He was not against learning. And when he met St. Anthony, I like St. Anthony because he was pudgy, usually in all the art. When he met St. Anthony, Anthony transferred into the friars. He met a holy man of purity of heart, an undivided heart. Anthony was a scripture scholar, all right? And so Francis, because of the way the mission was catching fire and they were being sent all over Italy, he knew he couldn't be sending out such uneducated brothers. But I think he had to wait and see that he could trust the person who was going to educate them. So he has a letter. There's a real letter to Anthony. And he says, I send wishes of health to Brother Anthony, my bishop. That's a sort of an endearing title at that time. It pleases me that you teach sacred theology to the brothers. It pleases me. As long as the words of the rule are not extinguished, do not extinguish the spirit of prayer and devotion. Now, the spirit of prayer and devotion, that's kind of it's a phrase. You know what that means because of what's already in your heart. You know what that means. Francis knew what it meant if a person came to follow him. So learn all there is to learn about the Gospels, but don't think you're better than anybody else because you do. That was his biggest fear, the minors, the little brothers. This introduction, I was in Assisi a couple months after we got Pope Francis. Is that not one of the... Someone said, what are we waiting for a second miracle for John 23rd? Pope Francis is the second miracle for his canonization. Well, this was a tile that they had at the time, and I love in this college, the San Damiano crucifix is everywhere. And that's a priceless icon. That is the Church of San Damiano, where the crucifix hung when Francis first experienced from his heart, go repair my house. And of course, we know Pope Francis is doing a darn good job of it. I'm just a little biased. I love finding this quote. Do you know who Joseph Ratzinger is? Joseph Ratzinger. Pope Benedict. Joseph Ratzinger. If you take a look, though, take a look at the date, 1969. Would you read that, please? Everybody? Pope Benedict said that. Pope Benedict was a Bonaventurean scholar. So, if that's the case, and the soul felt its worth, just keep thinking of that little phrase. And what does that, and the soul felt its worth. So, here you are in a college, a Franciscan-sponsored college. Okay, would you like to know about a tradition that addresses the concerns that tear at the heart of humanity today? Would you like to know what's under that? That can confirm the dignity and the rights of the human person, no matter what is the spiritual or the cultural household. That's a real important question. That gives a new vision of what it means to be human. You're thinking, wow, what could that mean? That is able to experience creation with a reverence that says nothing will ever be the same. Everything is different. And no matter where we find ourselves, we can find something of God, created by God. that will create no other possibility but to be ecologically literate in the healing of the earth. No other possibility once we get the foundational underpinnings. The intellectual tradition, and guess what? There is such a thing. The intellectual tradition is of values, a whole set of values, theologically informed. It has a distinct view of the world. And where do you see what that is? A distinct view of the world. And it's going to take the basis of it is going to be the intuitions of Francis. Certainly he never called himself a scholar. You saw what Ratzinger, Cardinal Ratzinger, the former Pope said about. It's not formal. It's not in a book somewhere. It's the intuition of Francis. It's how he understood the coming of Jesus and the reason for that. Same for Clare. Now, Zachary Hayes, there's a few names you're going to hear today. I think hopefully before you graduate, you'll be glad you heard these names. You'll meet them many times. Zach is a preeminent scholar of Bonaventure, and he taught a lot of us, really. But he said at one point, the reason we don't talk about a theology is because it really is embedded in the spirituality. I think that's important to know. When you're reading, like I know some of you have the Mary Bodo book, this was an anniversary book, and you have others that you've gotten to read. When you're reading what we would call the spirituality of Francis, hopefully with other things you're going to hear about today, you're going to start to recognize the theology, pristine theology of Francis. And according to Zach, it's the humanity of Christ. It's John English telling us, I really learned a lot about the dignity of the person hanging out with this crowd. It's the mystery of God as a generous love. One of the things we just did, and Alex alluded to it, I had 18 sisters come together from different congregations, 14 of our own, but then others, and we put together a national program called the Whole Sense of the Extravagant Love of God. It was phenomenal, and the next slide will give you the framework of it. To this day, that was launched in 2007. It has been done on 4 continents, and over 4,000 people have taken it. Something, we didn't know that. They would have run, if they had known that, they wouldn't have said yes to me. I mean, they found themselves in Africa, in Malaysia, in Singapore, in Dublin, in London, in Canterbury, in Scotland, doing this program, not to mention every other place in the United States. I want to say that didn't happen because it was a good program. It was a good program. And the soul felt its worth. Something went on when others went, and then the word just spread. Mystery of God as a generous love. We are desperate for that. And the sense of creation as a family. The canticle of the Son is all over this college. Creation, brother, sister. The basis of that program that had the 4,000 people that took it, we framed it out of the goodness of God. Now, don't you think we're ready to have someone talk about goodness and not sin? The goodness of God. The primacy of Christ. They'll say that we're Christocentric, which means Christ is at the center. You'll see why. And the dignity of the human person. If we did nothing else in our own college, I'm from Newman University in Aston, and the one facet that was asked to be given many times over in the college was the third piece on the dignity of the human person. Our times are aching for someone to have a theological overview of the dignity of the human person. Eric Doyle, wonderful, unbelievable scholar, funny, witty, died at age 47. One of the questions I have for God. He founded Canterbury. There's an international study center in Canterbury. I taught there for 7 years, just in the spring. To be in England in the spring of the year. How lucky is that? And I would have students from 15 nations in my class, just a 2-week Trinity term. Eric founded that place, and then God wanted him more, I guess. Could you read that, please, together? Forms the structures of our vision of God, humanity, and the world. When you leave here 4 years later, hopefully you're going to be able to be in conversation about that, and you're going to know that you're saying something very distinct. Your worldview is distinct. Why did we lose it? Got to tell you, when I met Zachary Hayes, I was on a committee with him. I said, Zach, how do you keep that under a bushel basket? You know, you're the preeminent scholar of it. Why don't we know this? Here's the reason. Finally, we did homework, and to help me out, to help me know the reason. You're going to watch a span of about 86 years, starting right here with this one. In 1879, Leo XIII issued a decree, Aeterni Patris. Now, in the world, in the seminaries around the world, the teaching was all over the place. Almost schisms, and certainly some heresies. And the priests that were coming out of the seminaries all over the world were not uniformly trained, and it was causing chaos. So the Pope decided that he had to come up with a one place where the best of everything we believe is. No surprise, it would be the Summa of Thomas Aquinas, who's Dominican. So he issues a decree, and he gives the pride of place to Thomism. He says that's going to hold up the Catholic faith. So you are to spread the teachings. For the defense now, of course, notice the time. There will have to be defending the faith. Our whole immigration story in our country is a lot about that for the Catholic Church. For the good of society and the advantage of the sciences. Those who don't agree will always be suspected of error. Now that's some statement. That is some statement. You don't agree with this, folks? Then you're going to be suspected of error. And it was so strong that if you picked up the statutes are the guiding principles of our different congregations, like our law, our particular law, if you will. If you picked up the statutes around this time, and I'm going to say for 80 years later, the Benedictines, the Carmelites, the Augustinians, the Jesuits, I think the Franciscans too, wrote it in their statutes that as seminarians they were going to be trained as Thomists. Just to make it even more embedded, in 1917, they put it in the Code of Canon Law, which is really big time with the church. And the canon law, it's, you just don't dance around canon law. It is what it is, and you have to abide by it. Ask the nuns. Oops. What happened was they said the affirmation of our methods and our teaching and our principles had to come from Thomas, from the angelic doctor. It is the carrier of Catholic orthodoxy. That's a lot of education going on worldwide. And that Franciscans were trained as Thomists. They were not trained from the teachings of St. Bonaventure, of Alexander of Hales, and of John Duns Scotus. Some Franciscans, however, and if you talk to different ones, they'll tell you their older friars, the ones that were educated differently, would take them aside in the off time that they weren't in school, and they would teach them the Franciscan perspective. And that's the fruit of that is what we have today. Thank God. Zachary Hayes would be one of them, taught by somebody else at nighttime or on Sunday afternoons, while he had to pass the test on Thomas, on the Thomist teaching, Thomistic. Now here's the hero of the day. Notice 1966. We went back, what was it, 1879, I think? 80-some years later. 80-some years later, before we get what we call an ecclesial nod. And of course, Paul VI was a phenomenal pope. And he wrote Alma Parens, which some people have in their booklets in their friaries and whatever. And he writes, would you read that, please? Scotus develops full height the gospel truth, which St. John the Evangelist and St. Paul understood to be preeminent in the divine plan of salvation. And you're going to see why. It's going to be the prologue of John, and it's going to be some of the writings of St. Paul, Colossians and Ephesians in particular, that really give us the primacy of Christ and what is the foundational part of what we believe as Franciscans. The beatification was the real deal. And so Paul, now we have another pope. We have John Paul II. Would you read that, please? The new evangelization of the people of the earth, and you're right at the cusp of that. We didn't know enough about John Duns Scotus, a medieval scholar, also died young, very, very hard. They call him the subtle doctor. But there's an incredible scholar. Her name is Mary Beth Ingham. She's a sister of St. Joseph in Orange, California. And she teaches college. She taught Marymount University, the undergraduates. She's perfect. She's like Bill Short. They're very clear and she is igniting an interest in John Duns Scotus. And he is the one, really, who presents what we most believe in our theological understanding of the whole meaning of Christ. Now, what I like about this slide, in the first order, there was what they call a Scotus Commission. While we were sleeping, while everybody else was taking their test as Thomists and whatever else the church told us to do, somehow, somewhere, there were these scholars behind the scenes using medieval Latin, if you can imagine, manuscripts. And by the year 2003, we had 20 volumes of the works of John Duns Scotus. 20 volumes. So while we were sleeping, thank God, some very hidden scholars were getting the work done. You'll find out, and you know this from your studies, if you don't have the critical text, it has no weight. You have to have the critical text. And so that's why we're so excited today, because we've arrived. If you would read that, please. Iliadelio, who is another scholar, says the church was breathing with only one lung when all we ever did was the Thomistic piece. Now the church is breathing with both lungs, and that particular statement is quite powerful. In the year 2000, a person she got an honorary doctorate here. Margaret Carney became the executive director of the Franciscan Institute. It's at St. Bonaventure University. It's where all of us learned whatever it is we know. And she was the new director, and she wanted her marching orders. So what happened was we gathered, where I live, in Aston, Pennsylvania, 21 scholars. And the scholars were people who worked with the text, like the Bonaventure text, the Scotus text. They were the people who wrote the editor of the Cord. They were the ones doing the early documents. If you've ever seen that, there's these 3 volumes. One quick side. When I was studying for my master's, my father was totally chagrined. He couldn't imagine such a waste of time. And when I was doing my questions, we had to answer questions and do papers. The book was this big. In fact, I just saw it upstairs in Alex's office, the omnibus, big red book, omnibus. And my dad said to me, Kathleen, if I live to be 100, you will never explain to me why it's taking you 6 summers to study about the simplest man that God ever made. And as for that book on that dining room table, I was trying to do my questions over the Christmas holidays because I was teaching 8th grade at the time. Good God Almighty, says my father, after you've read that book, what else should anybody have to know about Francis of Assisi? You might say he was not impressed. So Margaret is trying to say, I'm the director of the institute that gives the MAs. I need to know what is our mind to do. So we got 21 people from all over the place, and everyone that had a piece of the action, and the rest is history. And here's what happened. What got created from that experience, Joe Kenichi is another name. I'm sorry for all these names. It's like I have my little corner of the world here, you know. But Joe Kenichi, very, very fine scholar, he came to Aston and he presented a 10-part plan. A 10-part plan, and we had no idea that he was going to come with that. Here's the point of what he had to say. Would you read that, please? That's what you would have told me in not quite the same words, what it means to be Franciscan educated. And these scholars, luckily, and I've always been grateful, they're the finest human beings you could hang around. They're nobody, no swinging incense here. This is why they get up in the morning and why they do their work. And this is the hope and the optimism and the sense that we want to get out, and we're only just begun. So Joe presents this to us. He gives us the program. Bill Short could not come. So Bill sends a paper with Joe, mind you, all right? And he says, when you get there, this is what I'd like you to consider. We have to have serious work done on the interface between ecology, creation, and nature. Now, I would say right now, with all of the energy around climate change, I would say we're on the cusp of that, and you've done a whole lot already. And Bill would really be the one to say all this. He says we need involvement in the disciplines of economics, technology, politics, cosmology, etc. You could fill in the etc. So as to take the incarnation in its demands on our intellectual reflection seriously. Maybe it's time where I could use my one sentence here about the incarnation, since you keep hearing me say primacy of Christ. The Franciscans believe that Jesus was always coming. Now, we didn't pull that out of the air. If you look at Colossians and Ephesians and the prologue of John and the early church fathers, St. Irenaeus, we do not believe that the reason we have the Christ is because of sin. Now, how many of you have heard that before? Don't be shy. I'm going to say it again. We do not believe that the reason that we have the Christ, Jesus, became human, is because of sin. And Scotus says, if that's the case, we would have to be indebted to Satan for the greatest masterpiece ever imagined. Jesus would have to say thanks to Satan for becoming a human being. Jesus, the incarnation, was first in the mind of God. And because there was going to be the incarnation, we had to have a creation. And in the midst of the creation, in order to demonstrate the dignity of the human person, not, I'm going to come, I have to die on the cross because I have to redeem these people, they've really messed things up. The dignity of the human person is that for all eternity, our God was going to be one of us. Think about that as you're going home today. For all eternity. In the mind of God, we are here because there was going to be a time when the second person, when the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, was going to happen, and we got prepared for that, and here we are. Now, what happened was we messed things up so bad that part of what happened when Jesus got here, yes, was the cross, clearly. But that, he didn't say, I don't think I'll come now because they've really messed up our plan. I think I'll just stay where I am, in the heart of the Trinity. Didn't happen. Think about that, and there's so many ways. You've got it in the article that you're taking home by Bill Short. It's there, and there's a lot more for you to work with. Wait till you see what we've been doing with this. Are you okay? This is where people walk out sometimes. No? Okay, all right. Bill also said that we need to allow the Franciscan tradition of compassion in order to connect theology and the cross with the issues of justice and reconciliation. And Elia Delio, you heard me say that name. She's a professor right now at Villanova. She holds the special chair, but she's an incredible evolutionary, cosmic theologian, Franciscan woman. Her book, The Humility of God, is very, very fine. She has a whole chapter on the tears of God. And that, anyway, if ever you need to do a paper or something, it's a good book. So there's Joe again. And there he stood, nobody saw this coming, 21 scholars. And he tells us that we are in a vital time right now. We have got to recover it with compatibility. Now here's where you come in for the college. Postmodern thought. The affinity for science. Again, sky's the limit, cosmic. The valuation of creation, and the focus on freedom in the human person. This is what Joe was throwing down the gauntlet. Got to do this. I put this in here today just for you. I personally believe that the way into appreciation of Francis and Clare is through the art. Now you've got that all over this building. This particular piece is something I've worked with very much. It's called the Bardi Docile because it was hanging in a little side chapel, which I've shown right there. See that thing right there? There it is. This is in Santa Croce. And this chapel was built by a banker's family, which a lot of stuff in Florence was, the Bardi family. And over the years, it got to be hung in their chapel, so they call this the Bardi Docile. Now, what's important about this piece, and I'm not going to dwell with it, is that it was only painted in 1245. So if you're going to put episodes about somebody's life, and there are people still living, you darn well better get it right. And that's why I like this very much. On this particular piece of art, you will see the preaching to the birds. We have learned the preaching to the birds had absolutely nothing to do with nature. If you look at the birds in any of the art of that, they are birds that don't even belong in the same country, let alone on the same branch. So the preaching to the birds, which is, again, 1245, I mean, it's like 20 years after Francis dies, they had the understanding about universal mission. And all cultures and all peoples, it's in the art. We have the visit to the Sultan. When you look at the little one, when you get up close, the Sultan is wearing white. What would make that painter print the sign for holiness on the garb of the Muslim leader, Islam? I think it's fabulous. It's 20 years after the death of Francis. He's wearing white. It's the symbol of holiness. And Francis intuited that right away. That's why they got to be good friends. I like to tell the story. They talked about Sufi poetry. It's like you meeting somebody at an airport, you know, different culture, different kind, and you're talking about country western music, and you happen to both like it. So he charmed the Sultan, and the Sultan charmed him. And we got beautiful prayers from that Francis learned from that visit. I won't go into more, but that's how come art can get you into the real story. One of the things that Joe said was we have to collaborate with our centers. And I'll have to say, just talking to your president and Alex and Bill, you got to collaborate with Newman University, and they have to collaborate with you. We're only 2 hours south of you. I mean, that's my agenda that I'm going home with. God help them. But the study centers right now, when you saw Joe Kenichi, he just finished being the president of the Franciscan School of Theology. It used to be in Berkeley, and they moved it to Oceanside, which was their former everything. And it's associated with the University of San Diego, and they really are incredible, the scholars. Bill Short's out there. Mary Beth Ingham is out there. They're all part of that. There they are there. And then, of course, there's the Institute. And the Institute, you'll see with different handouts, that's where things still keep happening. This I thought was important, and I put it down only as a sample. First of all, before I go any further, are you doing okay? Are you all right with this? I should keep talking? All right? Clear? Questions? Anybody? Not yet. All right. I put this here as a sample. There are several ways that you can stay home. You can work in your pajamas if you want and get a certificate in Franciscan Studies. This one happens to be the one that most people know about, and it's Mary Elizabeth Imler is St. Francis, another St. Francis College, and it's in Joliet, Illinois. So they put this all together, and you know, you can get a hold of it if you care at all. But I know a lot of places now are trying to do it online. And then we have a thing called publishing. Again, this all came from Joe Kenichi. That meeting that I told you that we never expected him to walk in there and have a 10-point program. He said, we need to publish. This is where Alex comes in with the assignments that she didn't do. We need to publish booklets, 40-page booklets, and they need to be written in such a way that they can be taught in the schools. They said, pitch it to like sophomore. Now, unfortunately, a couple of scholars didn't follow the rules. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing, the synthesizing. So you can see the whole. I mean, he went the whole gamut. If you think I'm enthusiastic, you ought to see Joe Kenichi. Only he's much more introverted. Anyway, the whole gamut. So that if you give a rip about this stuff, you can pick up one of these 40-page books, like just the Primacy of Christ, for instance, Christology. He wanted it to be able to talk about the concerns in the church, economics, ethics. That means that before the day is done, you're going to find one of these books, and it's going to be on economics, ethics. It's going to be on the church, ecclesial, and more. Questions for reflection. Well, you know, that's where the teachers just love this. I mean, this could be a month program somewhere if you're doing Franciscan studies or faith and Franciscanism. They have all these names. This is now what it looks like. One of them. There must be 15. Imagine, this is only said, this is what I mean by, it's like a match igniting a dry bush. This was only 2001. We have 15. Franciscans never worked that fast before, let me tell you. We have 15 of these. All these people that sat down and got them together. This particular one is done by Mary Beth Ingham, and it's on Duns Scotus. It's fabulous. It's called Rejoicing in the Works of the Lord, Beauty in the Franciscan Tradition. Mary Beth will tell us she studied in Spain, has a doctorate from Madrid. She told us at the moment she got the light to figure out the subtle doctor of Scotus was that you learn Scotus through beauty. And she was never the same after that. And she's just so good in teaching. And the suggestions further. So 15 of them. And you probably have them on yourself, or you should, or you will. Yeah, okay. Now, that means they're still coming. So we have the sacraments, we're going to have the sciences, that's real important. Keith is excellent on climate change. And we have a whole, I'll show you the next thing, custodian on the view of the human person. I would recommend creation and human person are really ways into getting excited about the Franciscan theological tradition. Now, the book publication, and we're going to come a little bit later here, this is where I met Alex. This was a forum where it took 8 years to write this book. It's called The Franciscan Moral Vision, Considerations on the Love of God. 8 years, the best scholars in the world. And we had a forum in Colorado Springs. And I have to say, it was a sea change. You didn't leave that forum not committed to do something about wanting to tell the world that our Franciscan perspective is releasing of energy, of goodness, of beauty. And I'm not going to stand here and be Pollyanna. It isn't like they're not talking about all of the different crises that we live with. But when you come at it through a moral vision that accentuates the great commandment, how can that not be good? And it's about time we spent time thinking about things like that and not all these categories. This is wrong, this is right, this is black, this is yellow. Come on already. It's not our tradition. This person right here, I've done this for 35 years or more. My community didn't know what to do with me, so they let me freelance. That's true. I can freelance. So for 35 years, I've been able to be part of this energy that's going on. This woman, her name is Lisa Samuda. She's a Franciscan sister, perpetual adoration in Wisconsin. She's my right arm. Anything happens to Lisa, I'm done. My other right arm is my printer, Valley Press. But Lisa has her own webpage, and I'm going to show you things, and everything I show you, Lisa has done. When we were in Colorado Springs, she taped the whole forum. So what I like about this presentation is I don't have to leave you wondering, where do we go? What next? It's done. There are things to use. And Lisa is the one responsible. So that's her own webpage. The two essential DVDs that I really like you to know about, and I brought one, just to prove that I'm not making this up. This is Lisa's work. This is the moral vision, which is the second thing here, the bottom part. This is where I met Alex. We have the whole thing edited. We have study guides. It's here. And it can be worked with however it needs to be worked with, you know, to try to get, and there is a book that goes with this. So just to let you know, again, I keep going back to, this didn't happen before the year 2001. I'm a senior citizen in the Franciscan Institute in terms of my graduate degree. And it took between then and now to get real things on the table. When I studied, I didn't have anyone teaching the Christology course to me because the scholars weren't ready at the time. I'm not even going to tell you what year that degree goes. They weren't ready at the time. And now the whole thing's exploding. And you're in college. You're in one of the colleges. The early documents. Now, I told you about my father and the Big Red Book. I can imagine what he's thinking because the Big Red Book has now become 3 volumes, which again took about 18 years of work. Translations from the manuscripts. One is the saint, one is the founder, and the others are all the wonderful stories that we have. Fabulous. But it gets even better because you can access this. You don't have to be me or one of the crazies. You can access this on this particular webpage. That article that you have of the custodians, I'm the general editor of this, the one with Bill Short, are free. If you go into this webpage and you go to resources and you click custodians, you get 7 more. And right now, I just got back from my printer, the other right hand I told you about, and I just took 7 more to the printer. We're going to probably have about 20 in time. And they are done for you. The whole motivation of doing these 4 pages, or some of them now are 8 pages, is you. It's the colleges, the Association of Franciscan Colleges and Universities. We don't want to be getting things all worked up and then say, keep warm and well fed, go find somehow to do this. We're trying to give you the things to do it. And then you're going to give it back to us. The Association of Franciscan Colleges and Universities, St. Francis is key to that, right here in Brooklyn. There are 24 colleges throughout the United States. Who knew? All these people being Franciscan educated, thank you, who hopefully are going to be excited to say that. There's a journal that gets published, and the persons who work in the journal, the articles, they come from your faculty members. They come from all over the country, and they write articles of whatever they feel is important enough to share. So this journal also did not exist before the year 2001. Look at some of the work. The whole spirit of a Catholic education, the intellectual, what is it? Can ethics be taught? Do we ever need that now? Can ethics be taught? So that's your journal. And here's the team. One of it turns over, but here's Joe again, and there's Bill, and there's Margaret Carney. They're the ones you might know. Ed Conklin is the president of Siena College. Now the custodians, you have the copy. This is I could probably die doing this. This will be my swan song. I'll probably have 4 or 5 not even done. But we keep trying to churn these out, and I'm very open to any faculty member that will say to me, Kathleen, we really need something done on. I'm trying to teach more about the dignity of the human person. We need something on. So, okay, we listened. And the very first one is done by Zachary Hayes. Now, probably the most important one in the whole list. When you read these 4 pages, one of the other scholars said it was a magisterial synthesis of the Franciscan worldview in 4 pages. That was Zachary's keynote. We also have that on a clip, and I'll show you that in a minute. It pleases me that you teach theology. Michael Blasik was a professor at Siena and also Bonnie's, and it was a keynote which launched, it was a keynote, mind you, which launched the whole CFIT project. The vernacular theologian, that's a real fancy word for saying it's you and it's I. That whenever we read stuff, it's already in our heart. That makes us vernacular theologians. That's what Francis was. That's what Clare was. Dominic is a very, very famous history teacher at Bonaventures. Here's Mary Beth. The one thing necessary. She does a masterful piece right now comparing Anselm and Scotus. These are all names, but along the way maybe they won't be. And she compares what we just said about the Thomistic way of believing why Jesus came compared to the Franciscan way of believing why Jesus came. Very, very clear, very clear. And then, I won't go in the rest of it, but there's a lot here. There are things to help, plus there's 7 more that are coming. And they're free. That's the best news. They're all free. All you have to do is go into that webpage. I must have been hitting that, right? Yeah. Now, the DVD clips, this is the part faculties get the most excited about. We have 22 of these, and it was Lisa, myself, and 2 other sisters. We've been working on these for 4 years. What we did was we got copies of keynote talks, like It Pleases Me That You Teach, Zachary's. We edited them, and we did a study guide. Now, on some cases, we actually did composites. This is why this is helpful. The one I'm holding right now says incarnation. We have one on creation. We have one on the Trinity and one on heccheitas, which is a very fancy way of saying you're unrepeatable and there'll never be another you. The leaf is unrepeatable. It'll never be another leaf. Heccheitas. We usually like fancy words. St. Bonaventure University, the student body went crazy with it. They had puzzle pieces all over the campus. Nobody like you. In a case like this, like if you're doing a paper, you have to do a paper, you can do the whole mystery of Christ, the whole story of Christ, 5 minutes, Ilya. Incarnation, Zachary, 9 minutes. God's reason for the incarnation, nobody does it better than Mary Beth. The reason, 8 minutes. Christ, not sin, is the center of the interrelationship of God, the world, and humanity. Bill Short, 7 minutes. The relationship of creation to the incarnation, Ken and Osborne, 15 minutes. This is the kind of work it's been going on, and it's meant to be helpful so that we can't walk away from, let's just say something like this morning, and wonder where to go next. There are 22 of them. And they continue also. The programs that address the intellectual tradition, I just put them to be updated because you can't, I don't know for next year, but they go on. That's just to let you know that there's energy out there. Here's something important, maybe for faculty members, I'm not sure, but I would like to see a critical mass gather around this one. They're going to celebrate the 800th anniversary of the birth of St. Bonaventure at St. Bonaventure, and it's going to be this July. That should be really, really, really big. And then here's a treasure, and I showed you that with the other slide that said franciscantradition.org. I can't imagine the money that this costs, but they have just now launched the entire version of the early documents. Now you're probably saying, oh good, I'm happy you're happy. This is important. And if you're doing a paper and you want to know, you could do the Wolfagubio, all right? What's a Wolfagubio? Oh, well, we won't do that. Well, you could do San Damiano Cross. That's a good one. You could do St. Clare. And all you do is put it in, and it'll bring up every single one of the references from the early, from volume 1. Everything Francis ever wrote, bring it right up. I think that I think that's pretty good, especially if you have to do a paper. They're working on the other volumes as well. Now, I just learned this when I was getting ready for here, because I don't really teach at Newman, but I have good friends that do. And I found out that some of the work that Alex and her colleagues have been doing at the Association of Franciscan Colleges and Universities, that's this group here that writes this journal. I personally couldn't believe it. I told you I've been doing this for 35 years, all right? And we just now got our flags flying that says Newman University Catholic Education in the Franciscan Tradition. We're 50 years old. We only hung those flags last year. So you know we're at the cusp of something, just like you have it right outside. It seems as though some of the real movers and shakers in the different mission effectiveness departments of the universities put together a matrix of what are the essential characteristics. Now you can see if you agree with this from your experience here at St. Francis, but this is what they came up with. They're saying that number 1 is a sacramental view of the world and the human person as a reflection of God's overflowing goodness. Now you know, I don't know about you, but I was always put off by the word unceasing prayer. I said, great, I'm not in a cloister, keep warm, I'm happy for you. This is unceasing prayer right here. When you can walk out the door from your education experience and begin to acknowledge so much as the presence of God, that's quite something. And that's in everything. And that became the first value that they put on their matrix. The considerations here. There's that, oh, don't you love this word? Here you go, there's Eccheitas. Special care, honoring the dignity, and this is important, to provide opportunities, this is in the college experience, to contemplate and share God's abundant goodness and beauty. We had beauty as one of our things hanging all over the place last year. But this, if you could go through 4 years in a building with all your faculty members in any curriculum area, and this is the kind of emphasis that they had, I'd say that's a nice place to be. The second one was building relationships. No surprise, you already told me, being brothers and sisters, okay? So, little though, not the arrogance that Francis was afraid of because you're educated, all right? So, the accountability and a simplicity about that. The peacemaking, certainly you've heard so much on that. And justice, always to repair God's house. Third one, to be grounded in gospel values, living the truth in love. That happens to be our motto. That's our motto of Newman University. Supports every person on his or her lifelong journey of conversion. Grounded in the gospel values. That's why Pope Francis is so popular. No fluff. Is what it is. To contribute an intellectual tradition that reflects an acknowledgement of faith, an ethical and moral response to God's love. That is the sea change that is that whole course on the Franciscan moral vision. It's the great commandment. And then to model a response of leadership through service. I'm sure you've heard that all the time. Okay? Finally, if you would read that, please. I'm going to give you 1 minute to just look at that without saying it. Just look at that. That's Zachary. He has since died 2 years ago. But that's the legacy he left us. I know you have to go to class. And that's it. I just want to finish, though, with Gregory. I want you to hear what Gregory Boyle, I can be ecumenical. I'm going to end with the Jesuit. He says, we try to find a way to hold our fingertips gently to the pulse of God. We watch as our hearts begin to beat as one with the one who delights in our being. And then what do? We exhale the same spirit of delight in the world. This way will not pass again, and there is a duty to be mindful of that which delights and keeps joy at the center. My ways are not your ways, but they sure could be, says Jesus. We exhale, the breath has to go somewhere, to breathe into the world the same spirit of delight, confident that this is God's only agenda, that we are God's delight, his only agenda. God says, be glad forever and rejoice in what I create, for I create my people to be a delight. God thinking that we'd enjoy ourselves. Delighting is what occupies God, and God's hope is that we join in, that God's joy may be in us and this joy complete. We just happen to be God's joy. That takes some getting used to. That's the bottom line of the Franciscan intellectual tradition. So, thank you.